Hello, and welcome back to the fourth installment of Reconciling Zero as we go in search of Effective Zen. The question we posed last week was, how do we explain these four additional concepts: activity, spirituality, Buddhism, and Zen? And today we'll start with an investigation into the nature of activity. So why even be bothered with this idea of activity? Well, recall last week we touched on the question, what is Zen, and proposed two answers. A simple answer is that Zen is the pursuit of stillness. And a more precise answer that we proposed is that Zen is one manifestation of Buddhism, which in turn is one manifestation of spirituality, which in turn is just one manifestation of activity. And following this logic of this second answer, we realize that Zen is not an object, but an activity. And this should not be terribly controversial. Over the years, countless philosophers have spoken of the universe as activity, have spoken of the essence of all matter as activity. The Zen master Joshu Sasaki often put it this way: Buddhism is not an object. Zen is not an object. The implication here is that we often mistakenly slice up the world into collections of things, each having an intrinsic nature. But the fundamental reality is interdependence. And the net effect of this interdependence is a universe of activity, a kind of cosmic soup of stimulus and response. And so, if Zen and Buddhism are indeed activities, then a better understanding of the nature of activity might allow us to better appreciate both Buddhism and Zen. And as an aside, as we pursue this notion of activity, we'll also get our first introduction to the concept of zero. The zero that we see in the name of this project, namely Reconciling Zero. Now, in formal lectures, Joshu Sasaki would often propose the following. As the Buddha taught, zero inevitably splits into mutually opposing activities, called plus and minus or expansion and contraction, which inevitably disappear back into zero. So a bit of a mouthful, and over the years I'm guessing I've heard this teaching expressed some 1,000 times. And while we might interpret this as a description of impermanence, we can also view it as something we might call the fundamental activity model. That is, a picture of the very nature of activity. And from this new perspective of activity, perhaps a more complete picture of Buddhism and Zen may emerge. And with apologies to Sasaki, we may want to consider a definition that is slightly more direct, namely, from and to zero activity, a manifested activity inevitably arises and inevitably returns. So, what do we mean by zero activity? And what do we mean by a manifested activity? A topic for next time, perhaps. So for next week, the question is, what do we mean by zero activity? And what do we mean by a manifested activity? And until next week, cheers!